The morning light filtered through the blinds of the Coastal Paradise Travel Agency, illuminating Naomi Jackson's desk. She was paging through hotel brochures, preparing for another day of work in the small resort town of Dewey Beach. At 27, Naomi had grown accustomed to the measured rhythm of life in this place where everyone knew everyone, and the main events were the arrival of new tourists and seasonal festivals on the waterfront. The door of the agency swung open, letting in an elderly couple from Ohio along with the sea breeze. The woman in the bright pink t-shirt went straight to the counter where Naomi worked, while her husband stayed behind to look at the pictures of local attractions on the walls. "We need a hotel right by the water, but not too expensive," the tourist said without saying hello, "and make sure it has breakfast. We don't like to find somewhere to eat." Naomi smiled habitually and pulled out a few catalogs. Working in the travel business had taught her patience and the ability to find common ground with a variety of people. In the year since she'd moved to Dewey Beach, she'd become one of the most popular consultants in town. Clients appreciated her attention to detail and her ability to find exactly what they needed. "This one here might interest you." She pointed to a photo of a small family-run hotel 3 blocks from the beach. "Family-run business, very cozy, and the price is quite reasonable. And the breakfasts there are really excellent. Homemade pastries, fresh fruit." While the couple studied the offer, Naomi glanced at her watch. It was about 3 hours before lunch, which meant there was still half a workday ahead of her. After work, she had a meeting waiting for her that no one needed to know about, especially Caden. At the same time, across town, Caden Reed was setting up equipment in the studio of the local radio station. At 32, he was already considered one of the best sound technicians in the area, though he never bragged about it himself. His job required precision and attention to detail, qualities he had in abundance. But outside the workplace, Caden often seemed like a different person, moody, irritable, ready to snap at anything. The morning show host, a guy named David, chattered into the microphone about the weather and weekend plans, while Caden monitored the sound level and quality of the program. The work flowed automatically, leaving room for reflection, which had been getting more and more gloomy lately. Caden pulled out his phone and opened up social media, where he had several accounts under different names. His fingers quickly typed another post. "All these women are the same. Lying, manipulating, using men for their own ends. When will society stop protecting them?" He pressed publish and tucked his phone into his pocket. Saying things like that had become a habit for him over the past few months. On the internet, he could say what he thought without fear of judgment from others. David ended the commercial break and beckoned to Caden. The music faded smoothly, giving way to the anchor's voice as he began to read the local news. Caden mechanically adjusted the sound levels, but his thoughts were far away. He planned to meet Naomi tonight, and the prospect both pleased and alarmed him. Across town, in a small house on Maple Street, 58-year-old Vivian Harris was finishing her morning coffee at the kitchen window. Since her retirement 3 years ago, watching her neighbors had become one of her main pastimes. Not out of curiosity, but more out of boredom and a desire to feel part of what was going on around her. Naomi's apartment was directly across the street, and Vivian had unwittingly witnessed many of the events in the young woman's life. Naomi had seemed like a pleasant neighbor. She always said hello, helped her with her shopping when they met at the store. But in recent months, Vivian noticed some oddities in her behavior. Naomi often had visitors. Some Vivian recognized. Caden, the gloomy guy who worked at the radio station, came regularly. But there were others. A middle-aged man she'd seen a few times late at night, a young couple who came for the weekend. Vivian didn't consider herself a gossip, but she couldn't help noticing that Naomi's life was more busy than it seemed at first glance. This morning, for example, she had seen Naomi leaving the house in an unusually good mood. The girl was even humming something as she walked to her car. It was a stark contrast to her behavior last night, when she'd come home visibly upset after her conversation with Caden on the porch. The day at the travel agency went on as usual. Naomi had helped a couple from Ohio book a room, counseled a family with children on activities for the little ones, and answered a dozen calls from potential clients. The job required constant communication, and that suited her. She loved people and knew how to connect with them. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the flow of clients subsided, and Naomi had a chance to get something to eat. She took a sandwich out of her bag and started looking through the messages on her phone. Among the work notifications were a few personal ones, from Caden, from a friend in Los Angeles where she'd moved from a year ago, and one that made her heart beat faster. "I'm getting off at 7. Meet me at the usual place?" Naomi quickly typed back, "Sure, I'll be waiting." She knew she was taking a risk, but she couldn't bring herself to stop these meetings. Her relationship with Caden was becoming increasingly strained, and being with Terrence gave her what she lacked in her everyday life: ease, understanding, a sense of being appreciated for who she was. Terrence Clark was getting ready for his evening shift at the Sea Breeze bar. At 34, he had already been bartending for 8 years and knew almost all the regulars by sight. The bar was located off the tourist routes, making it a meeting place for locals looking for a quiet drink and socializing after work. Terrence wiped glasses and set out bottles, preparing for the influx of customers. Being a bartender had taught him to read people, to understand their moods by their facial expressions and demeanor. Those skills came in handy in his personal life, especially when it came to his relationship with Naomi. They met a few months ago, when she came to the bar with her colleagues to celebrate a successful week at the agency. Terrence immediately noticed her among the other customers, not only because of her looks, but also because of the special energy she exuded. Naomi laughed, told stories, and was the center of attention of the company, but she did it naturally, without any naivete. When the colleagues left, Naomi stayed to finish her cocktail and they got to talking. It turned out that they had a lot in common. Both of them had moved to Dewey Beach from big cities in search of a quieter life. Both of them worked in the service industry and understood the peculiarities of communication with people. The conversation lingered until the bar closed, and then they went for a walk along the boardwalk. Since then, they had met regularly, but always in secret. Naomi explained that she had a complicated relationship with her boyfriend, and she did not want to aggravate the situation. Terrence agreed to such terms, although he realized that sooner or later the secret would be revealed. Caden was finishing up his workday at the studio. The day shift was coming to an end, and he would soon be replaced by a colleague working the evening broadcast. He turned off the equipment, checked the tapes he had made during the day, and prepared to leave. On the way home, Caden stopped by the grocery store. He planned to make dinner for himself and Naomi, who was supposed to come over after work. These evenings together had been happening less and less lately, which couldn't help but bother him. Naomi often cited fatigue or extra work, and when they did spend time together, she seemed distracted and aloof. Caden picked out groceries for a simple dinner: pasta, vegetables for a salad, and a bottle of wine. Standing in line at the register, he pulled out his phone again and texted Naomi, "Waiting for you at home by 8. I'll cook dinner." The reply didn't come right away, and when Caden read it, his mood soured. "Sorry, can't make it tonight. I'm working late. Meet me tomorrow?" He knew the travel agency closed at 6 p.m., which meant Naomi was cheating on him again. Anger rose in his chest, but Caden did his best to suppress it. Instead, he wrote another social media post about how women use lies as a primary tool to communicate with men. Naomi actually finished work at 6 and went home to change before her meeting with Terrence. She chose a simple dress and a light jacket. The bar was always cool because of the air conditioning. Before leaving, she checked her phone and saw a text from Caden. Guilt prickled in her chest, but she tried to ignore it. Vivian watched from the window as Naomi got into her car and drove away. The clock showed almost 7 p.m., which seemed odd for someone who was supposedly staying late at work. Vivian shook her head. Young people had become too careless, not thinking about the consequences of their actions. For the next few days, Caden noticed Naomi becoming more and more secretive. She answered her phone with one-word answers, avoided his gaze when they saw each other, and made up new reasons not to spend time with him. Suspicions that had once seemed a figment of his imagination were beginning to take real shape. Thursday morning, tuning equipment in the radio studio, Caden couldn't concentrate on his work. His thoughts kept returning to Naomi, to her strange behavior of the past few weeks. David, the morning show host, had approached him several times, but only received scattered answers. Finally, during a commercial break, David approached the remote. "What's going on with you, buddy? You're like a fog today," he said, taking off his headphones. Caden shrugged, not lifting his eyes from the instruments. "Just didn't sleep well. I'm fine." "If you want to talk, I'm always willing to listen." David put a hand on his coworker's shoulder. Sometimes it helps. But Caden wasn't ready to share his suspicions, even with a close friend. Instead, he nodded and turned on the next music track, immersing himself back into his work. Anger and suspicion gnawed at him from the inside out, demanding some kind of action, but he didn't know where to start. On his lunch break, Caden sat in his car in the radio station parking lot, browsing Naomi's social media accounts. Her accounts looked the usual: pictures from work, selfies, pictures with motivational quotes. Nothing suspicious, but that was exactly what was alarming. Too clean, too right for someone who was clearly hiding something. He switched to his accounts and wrote another post. Women have learned to lie so naturally that they begin to believe their own lies. They create whole worlds of illusion in which a man becomes a fool who understands nothing. Anger spewed out through the keyboard, finding an outlet in words he couldn't say out loud. After work, Caden headed home, but he couldn't find a place to stay. The apartment seemed too quiet, too empty. He turned on the television, but couldn't focus on the programs. His thoughts kept returning to Naomi, to what she might be doing at these very moments, who she might be dating. The decision came suddenly. On Thursday night, he decided to follow Naomi. He parked in front of the travel agency half an hour before the end of the day and waited. His heart was beating so loudly that he was afraid passers-by would hear him. Naomi left the building at 6 sharp, as usual, but instead of driving home, she headed toward the old part of town. Caden followed her car at a safe distance, trying to remain unnoticed. Naomi stopped outside the Seabreeze bar. Caden watched as she fixed her hair in front of the rearview mirror, adjusted her makeup, and headed toward the entrance. His heart raced with anger and pain at the same time. His suspicions were confirmed. Naomi was indeed seeing someone else. He parked across the street and watched through the windows of the bar. It was pretty dark inside, but he could make out the silhouettes of the customers. Naomi was sitting at a table in the far corner, across from a man Caden recognized. It was Terrence, the establishment's bartender. They were talking animatedly, Naomi laughing, touching his arm. Caden hadn't seen her so natural and happy in months. Terrence would occasionally get up from the table to serve other customers, but always returned to Naomi. At times like this, she would be waiting for him, playing with her phone or just staring out the window. When he sat back down, her face would light up with the smile that Caden remembered from the first few months of their relationship. After sitting in the car for almost 2 hours, Caden finally left. At home, he pulled out his laptop and wrote a long post on social media about how women are capable of betraying even the closest of people. They can look you in the eye and lie with such sincerity that you begin to doubt your own sanity. But the truth always comes to the surface, no matter how deep they bury it. Anger needed a way out, and the internet was the only place for him to express what was building up inside. The next day, Caden arrived at work earlier than usual. He wanted to talk to Naomi, but he didn't know how to start the conversation without giving himself away. Around noon, he called her at the travel agency under the pretense that he wanted to take her out to dinner. "Hi, it's me," he said, trying to sound calm. "How are things going at work?" "It's good," Naomi replied, but you could hear the wariness in her voice. "Lots of clients today. How about we get together tonight?" It's been a while since we've spent time together." The pause dragged on longer than it should have. Caden could hear background sounds, people's voices, phones ringing, the noise of the air conditioner. Naomi was clearly thinking about what to say in response. "Sorry, Caden, but I promised to help a coworker with her reports today. Maybe this weekend?" Caden clenched his fists. Another lie. "Of course I understand. Work is more important." "Don't say that." Naomi's voice took on an apologetic note. "It's just really busy right now. You know how it is during tourist season." "I know," he replied briefly and hung up. After the conversation, he couldn't concentrate on anything. David had made several comments to him about the sound quality, the music came on late, and the commercials were overlapping. A rage was growing inside him that was becoming increasingly difficult to control. "Why don't you take the day off?" David suggested after another mistake. "I can see you're out of shape." "No, I'm fine," Caden cut him off. "Just tired." But normal was far from everything. Thoughts of Naomi and Terrence kept him busy. He imagined their conversations, their touch, their laughter at how easy it was to fool a gullible guy. Anger mixed with pain, creating a toxic mix of emotions that demanded an outlet. At the same time, Naomi was actually feeling remorseful. The meeting with Terrence the day before had been especially nice. They'd talked about future plans, about how they'd like to travel together when the situation with Caden was resolved. Terrence had been patient and understanding, but Naomi could see that the lies were beginning to weigh on him. "You can't go on like this forever," he told her as they said goodbye at her car. "Sooner or later, you're going to have to make a choice." Naomi knew he was right, but she couldn't bring herself to make a decision. The relationship with Caden had long since ceased to bring her joy, but the breakup seemed like something dreadful and final to her. Caden was unpredictable, especially when he was angry, and she was afraid of his reaction, afraid of the scenes and scandals that would inevitably follow. At work, she tried to look her usual self, smiling at clients, counseling tourists, but her thoughts kept returning to the ambivalence of her situation. On the one hand, Terrence was giving her something she didn't get from Caden: attention, care, a sense of self-worth. On the other hand, she realized she was deceiving a man who, despite all his faults, genuinely loved her. Friday night, Caden went to follow Naomi again. This time he was more cautious, parking in an alley where he could see the exit of the travel agency, but he himself remained undetected. He had brought a coffee and a sandwich with him, preparing for a long wait. Naomi exited the building and headed for her car, but instead of driving towards the bar, she drove home. Caden was relieved, but it was premature. A half hour later, Naomi drove out of the house again, changing into more dressy clothes, a short dress and a light jacket. She headed toward the same bar where she'd met Terrence the day before. This time, Caden ventured inside. His heart was beating so hard he was afraid the people around him would hear it. He was afraid the people around him would hear it. He ordered a beer at the counter and watched the couple from behind the other customers. Naomi and Terrence were sitting at the same table as yesterday, deep in intimate conversation. Terrence was saying something, gesturing vigorously, and Naomi was listening to him with an attention that Caden hadn't seen from her in months. Every now and then, she leaned across the table to him, touched his arm, and they both laughed. Their closeness was obvious even to an outside observer. At one point, Terrence stood up and headed for the bar. As he passed Caden, he paid no attention to him, concentrating on making cocktails for the other customers. Caden studied his face, trying to figure out what it was about this man that attracted Naomi. Terrence looked confident, moved easily and naturally, interacted with the customers without strain. All things Caden didn't possess. Caden finished his beer and left the bar, feeling the anger literally overwhelming him. He got in his car and pulled out his cell phone. His fingers trembled as he dialed Naomi's number. "Hello?" she answered after a few beeps. Music and people's voices could be heard in the background. "Where are you?" Caden asked, not hiding his irritation. A pause. "At home," Naomi lied. Watching a movie. Why? What movie? Another pause. Longer. I don't remember the title. Some kind of comedy. I see. What's the music in the background? Music? I don't hear any music. Could be interference on the line. Caden closed his eyes, trying to control himself. I see. Have a good night. He disconnected and slammed his fist on the steering wheel. The lies were getting more and more brazen, and Naomi didn't even try to come up with plausible explanations. She just denied the obvious, hoping he wouldn't check her words. At home, Caden turned on his laptop and spent several hours researching Terrence's social media profiles. The bartender led an active online life. Photos with friends, posts about work, reposts of music videos. Caden scrutinized every photo, every comment, trying to find any mention of Naomi. There weren't any, which meant Terrence could keep secrets too. On Saturday morning, he decided to act differently. Instead of a stakeout, he simply showed up at Naomi's house unannounced. It was a risk. She might not be alone, but Caden was willing to do anything to find out the truth. Naomi opened the door in her robe, clearly just waking up. Her hair was disheveled, and there was no makeup on her face. When she saw him, she looked surprised and slightly worried. Caden? What are you doing here so early? Wanted to see you. He walked past her into the apartment, looking around. We haven't talked much lately. The apartment looked normal, no sign of a stranger's presence. But Caden noticed that there were 2 cups on the kitchen table, though one of them was clean. I told you, lots of work. Naomi closed the door and followed him into the living room. Want some coffee? Caden nodded and sat down on the couch, continuing to study the apartment. Naomi's smartphone was on the coffee table, and when a message came in, the screen lit up. Caden had time to see the sender's name, Terrence, and the beginning of the text. Yesterday was great. Message for you, he said, pointing to the phone. Naomi quickly grabbed the device and slipped it into her robe pocket. Probably from a coworker. Might as well read it later. On a Saturday morning, your coworkers are very hardworking. Naomi went to the kitchen to make coffee, and Caden stayed in the living room, mulling over what he'd seen. Now he had direct evidence Terrence's name on his phone, a text message sent in the early morning hours of the weekend. But he still didn't know what to do with this information. Why don't we spend the day together today? He suggested, when Naomi returned with coffee. It's been a while since we went to the ocean. Naomi took a seat on the edge of the couch, holding her cup in her hands. Sorry, but I already have plans. My mom asked me to come over to help with the renovations. Another lie. Caden knew Naomi's mom lived in another state, and they called once a week on Sundays. I see, he said and finished his coffee. I'll see you another time then. Vivian Harris was watering the flowers on the windowsill when she noticed Caden approaching Naomi's house. The time was early for visits, barely 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning. The young man looked tense, his movements sharp and nervous. An hour later, Vivian saw him leave Naomi's house and head toward his car. His expression was grim, and his gait was determined. Something in his demeanor alarmed the older woman. Over the years of watching her neighbors, she had learned to recognize the signs of impending trouble, and now everything pointed to the fact that a serious conflict was brewing in the young couple's relationship. On Saturday night, Naomi did meet Terrence. They walked along the waterfront, holding hands and enjoying the coolness of the ocean breeze. Terrence was particularly gentle with her, but Naomi sensed that something had changed in his demeanor. I think your boyfriend suspects something, he said, as they sat down on a bench overlooking the ocean. What makes you think that? There was some man at the bar last night, sitting at the bar, but he kept looking in our direction. And as I walked past him, I felt him get really tense. Naomi felt everything inside clench with fear. Do you think it was Caden? I don't know. I don't know him by sight, but something I didn't like about that guy. They sat on the bench for another long time, discussing the situation. Terrence insisted that Naomi should talk to Caden and clear things up. Naomi agreed in theory, but in practice she didn't know how to start such a conversation. On Sunday, Caden spent all day at home thinking about the situation. He knew that Naomi was cheating on him with the bartender at the Sea Breeze, but he didn't know what to do with that information. A direct accusation could lead to a scandal and a permanent breakup, and he still hoped to find a way to save the relationship. He reread their old correspondence, looked at the photos they'd taken in the first few months of dating. Everything had been different then. Naomi had laughed at his jokes, was interested in his work, was planning a future together. What changed? When did he start to lose her? That evening he texted Naomi, "We need to have a serious talk. Come see me tomorrow after work." The reply came a few minutes later. "Okay, what time?" 7 p.m. Caden realized that tomorrow's conversation would be a turning point in their relationship. He could either forgive Naomi and try to start over, or he could end the story once and for all. But whatever choice he made, the lies had to stop. Monday began for Naomi with an unsettling premonition. Caden's message that she needed to have a serious conversation had kept her up all night. She woke up several times, running through possible scenarios for the upcoming meeting in her head. Caden sounded determined, and that scared her more than if he had just yelled or accused. At work, she tried to focus on the clients, but her thoughts kept returning to the evening. Her coworkers asked several times if she was okay. Naomi seemed distracted and nervous. She replied that she just hadn't slept well, but knew her condition was noticeable to those around her. At lunchtime, she texted Terrence, "It's going to be a difficult conversation with Caden tonight. I think he suspects something." The reply came a few minutes later. "Be careful. If anything goes wrong, call me right away." Caden spent the day in the radio studio in a state of tense anticipation. His work was mechanical. He adjusted equipment, monitored sound quality, but his thoughts were occupied with the upcoming conversation. He rehearsed in his head many times what he would say to Naomi, how he would put her in front of the facts, what arguments he would bring. David had noticed his state of mind and had tried several times to make conversation, but Caden had responded with one-word answers, unwilling to share his worries. By the end of the workday, the tension had reached a breaking point. At home, Caden tidied up the apartment and made dinner for two, though he wasn't sure what they would eat. The table was set like a romantic date candles, nice plates, wine glasses. Perhaps if the conversation went well, if Naomi admitted everything and apologized, they might still have a chance. At 7:30, he showered and changed into a clean shirt. The mirror reflected a tense face with eyes red from sleeplessness. Caden tried to relax, but to no avail. Too much depended on this evening. Naomi arrived exactly at 7. She too had changed after work, opting for a simple dress and cardigan. She was carrying a small purse with her phone in it, with Terrence's number on speed dial. "Hi," she said as she entered the apartment. "It smells good. Did you cook?" "Yeah, thought we could have dinner together." Caden closed the door and ushered her into the living room. "Sit down, I'll serve the food." Naomi sat down on the couch, looking around the room. Caden had clearly tried. The apartment was spotlessly clean, candles burned on the table, mouth-watering smells wafted from the kitchen. It didn't seem like the setting for a serious conversation, and she relaxed a little. Caden brought plates of pasta and vegetables and opened a bottle of red wine. They ate in silence for the first few minutes, exchanging wary glances. Naomi told a few stories from work. Caden shared his plans for the weekend. Just an ordinary evening of an ordinary couple, except for the tension that could be felt in the air. "Thanks for dinner," Naomi said as they finished eating. "Everything was delicious." "You're welcome." Caden finished his wine and set his glass aside. "Naomi, we really need to talk." "About what?" She tried to speak calmly, but her voice treacherously shook. "About us. About what's been going on between us lately." Naomi clenched her hands into fists under the table. What do you mean? You've become different, detached. I feel like you're hiding something. Caden, I just have a lot of work to do right now. Don't talk to me about work. He stood up abruptly from the table. I know work has nothing to do with it. Naomi stood up as well, instinctively taking a step back. I don't understand what you're getting at. The sea breeze, Terrence. Do you understand now? Naomi's face went pale. She was silent for a few seconds, mulling over her answer. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me. Caden pounded his fist on the table, making the plates clink. I saw you together. I followed you. You followed me? There was indignation in Naomi's voice. How could you? And how could you lie to me for months? I don't lie to anyone. Enough! Caden stepped closer to her. I know everything. I saw you sitting in that bar, the way you touch his arm, the way you laugh. I saw the messages on your phone. Naomi backed away even further until her back was against the wall. Caden, calm down. Let's talk calmly. Calmly? He laughed bitterly. Months of deception and you want to talk calmly? It's not what you think. What is it? Just friendship? Business meetings? Naomi closed her eyes, realizing she couldn't lie anymore. Yes, we're dating, but that doesn't mean what? That you're not sleeping with him? That you don't plan on leaving me for him? Caden, our relationship hasn't worked for a long time. You know that as well as I do. Is that why you decided to find a replacement without letting me know? I wasn't looking for a replacement. It just happened. Just happened? Caden grabbed her by the shoulders. You think I'm a fool? You think I don't see what's going on? Let me go. Naomi tried to pull free, but his grip was too strong. How long has this been going on? How many times have you lied to me? Caden, you're hurting me. But he didn't hear her words. Months of repressed anger and suspicion had come rushing out. I trusted you. I loved you. And you've been playing some kind of game with me all this time. It wasn't a game. I didn't want to hurt you. You didn't? He shook her so hard she banged her head against the wall. Then why didn't you honestly tell me it was over? Because I was afraid of your reaction. Afraid of exactly that. Afraid? Aren't you afraid of him? Or is he not as scary as me? Naomi tasted blood in her mouth from hitting the wall. Caden, please stop. We can talk this out. Discuss? He pressed her harder against the wall. What is there to discuss? The way you've been leading me around by the nose for months? I tried several times to talk to you about our relationship, but you wouldn't listen. When? When did you try? Naomi tried to remember specific episodes, but her mind was a mess of fear and pain. I told you we needed to communicate more. That's not the same as telling the truth about another man. The conversation turned into a scream. Caden had no control over the strength of his arms, and Naomi was desperately trying to free herself. At one point, she pushed him away and tried to reach for her purse with her phone. Where are you going? Caden caught up with her in a few steps. I'm leaving. I need some time to think. No, you're not going anywhere until we figure this out. I don't have anything else to say. Yes, I'm dating Terrence. Yes, I lied to you. But now you're drunk and angry, and I don't want to continue this conversation. Drunk? Caden grabbed her arm as she reached for her purse. I had one glass of wine. Let me go, Caden. I'm serious. And I seriously want to know how long you were going to fool me. Naomi jerked sharply, trying to wrench her hand from his grasp. At that moment, they both lost their balance and fell onto the coffee table. The glass surface shattered with a loud crack. Caden got up first, but Naomi lay motionless among the shards of glass. A dark puddle was slowly spreading from under her head. Naomi? He leaned toward her, but she didn't answer. Panic came over him instantly. He tried to lift her up, but his arms were shaking so hard he could barely keep his balance. Blood was everywhere. on the floor, on his hands, on the broken glass. After a few minutes, Caden realized Naomi was dead. A shard of glass had pierced her neck, severing her carotid artery. Death came quickly. He sat down on the floor next to the body, unable to believe what had happened. This wasn't supposed to happen. He just wanted to talk to her, find out the truth, maybe find a way to make things right. Vivian Harris was washing dishes after dinner when she heard the sound of breaking glass from the apartment across the hall. Then screams, male and female voices that grew louder and louder. She went to the window and saw that the light was on in Naomi's apartment, but the blinds were down. The noise continued for a few minutes, then suddenly subsided. Vivian waited, listening, but heard nothing more. This seemed strange to her. Usually quarrels were followed by either conciliatory talk or the slamming of doors. But now, there was dead silence. The elderly woman hesitated for about half an hour, but the anxiety didn't go away. Finally, she dialed the emergency number. "Good evening. My name is Vivian Harris. I live at 34 Maple Street. I think something serious is going on in the apartment across the street. I heard screaming, the sound of breaking glass, and then everything went quiet." The dispatcher wrote down the address and promised to send a patrol car to check it out. Caden had been sitting on the floor for over an hour when he heard the sirens. At first, he thought it was an ambulance or fire truck on its way to someone else's house. But the sound grew louder, and soon the red and blue lights were flashing outside. He got up, went to the window, and looked out through the blinds. 2 police cars had stopped right in front of the house. 4 officers got out and headed for the entryway. The panic returned with redoubled force. Caden thrashed around the apartment, not knowing what to do. There was no way to hide the body. Running away wasn't either. The cops were already in the building. He heard a knock on the door. "Police, open the door." Caden took a deep breath, took one last look at Naomi, and went to open it. 2 uniformed officers stood in the hallway. "Good evening, sir. We received a report of a disturbance at this address. May we come in?" "Of course." Caden stepped aside, letting them into the apartment. The police officers saw the body and the smashed table at once. One of them immediately called for backup and investigators, while the other began to survey the scene. "Sir, what's your name?" the senior officer asked. "Caden Reed. This is my apartment." "And who is this woman?" "My girlfriend, Naomi Jackson." "What happened here?" Caden took a deep breath, preparing for the most difficult conversation of his life. "We got into a fight. She tried to leave. I tried to stop her. We fell on the table. I didn't mean to. It was an accident." Detective Roxanne Matthews received the call at 9:30 in the evening. She was at home helping her 14-year-old son with his math homework when the phone rang. "Homicide on Maple Street," the duty officer reported. "Young female, 27 years old, suspect on scene claims it was an accident." Roxanne sighed, looked at her son, who was solving equations at the kitchen table. "I have to go, Marcus. Will you finish it yourself?" "Sure, Mom. Be careful." At 41, Roxanne had already been a police officer for 15 years, the last 8 as a detective. She'd seen many deaths, many family tragedies, but each new case still touched her personally. When she arrived on the scene, she saw a familiar sight: police cars, curious neighbors, yellow tape enclosing the scene. Forensics were working in the apartment, taking pictures and gathering evidence. "What do we have?" she asked Sergeant Thompson, who was the first to arrive on the call. "Naomi Jackson, 27 years old, works for a travel agency. Dead from a wound to the neck caused by a shard of glass. Caden Reed, 32, her boyfriend, claims it was accidental during an argument." "Where is he now?" "In a patrol car, calm, answering questions, not trying to run." Roxanne nodded and entered the apartment. A body lay among the shards of a broken glass table. Lots of blood, but the location of the wound could indeed indicate an accident. Though experience told her that accidents were rare in family conflicts. She looked around the rest of the apartment. In the kitchen, the remains of dinner for 2, an open bottle of wine, nearly empty. In the living room, signs of a struggle, an overturned chair, scattered couch cushions. "Any witnesses?" she asked Thompson. The neighbor across the hall, Vivian Harris, 58 years old. She called the police when she heard the screams and the sound of breaking glass. Roxanne left the apartment and headed toward the patrol car where Caden sat. The man looked shaken. There were bloodstains on his shirt. As she approached, he lifted his head and looked at her with eyes red from tears. "Mr. Reed, my name is Detective Matthews," she introduced herself, sitting down in the back seat next to him. "I need to ask you some questions about what happened tonight." Caden nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his palm. "I've already told the other police officers everything. It was an accident. We got into an argument. She wanted to leave. I tried to stop her. We fell on the table. Tell me more about your argument. What were you arguing about?" Caden was silent for a few seconds, pondering an answer. "Naomi had become distant lately. I suspected she was seeing someone. Decided to talk to her about it today." "And what did she say?" "At first she denied it, but then she admitted she was seeing another man. I got angry. We started arguing. She wanted to leave. I grabbed her arm. We fell." Roxanne studied his face as he spoke. Caden looked genuinely upset, but there was a sense of understatement in his story. "How long did you and Naomi date?" "About a year. We met shortly after she moved to Dewey Beach." "Is this the first time your arguments ended in a physical confrontation?" "Yes, of course." Caden looked at her in surprise. "I've never raised a hand to her. What happened today was an accident." Roxanne closed the notebook. "Mr. Reed, you'll have to spend the night at the station. We'll continue this conversation tomorrow when I've gathered more information." The next morning, the detective had several important interviews to conduct. The first was Vivian Harris, the neighbor who had called the police. The older woman met her in her neat living room, where the window had a direct view of Naomi's apartment. "I've seen them dating for over 6 months, Vivian told her, clutching a cup of tea in her hands. Everything seemed normal at first. Caden came over regularly. They had dinner together, went out on weekends. But for the last 2 months, something's changed." "What exactly?" Roxanne made notes in her notebook. "He started coming over more often, but you could see that Naomi didn't always like it. Sometimes she wouldn't let him in right away. They'd talk on the doorstep, and a few times I heard him raise his voice." Vivian set her cup on the table and looked out the window. "And there was also the strangeness with the other visitors." "What visitors?" "There were all sorts of people coming to see Naomi. One man showed up pretty regularly, especially on days when Caden was away. Tall, dark-skinned, looked nice. They were obviously close. I saw him hugging her when they met." This information piqued the detective's interest. "When was the last time you saw this man?" "Last weekend. They were walking down the street holding hands. Naomi looked happy." After talking to Vivian, Roxanne went to the travel agency where Naomi worked. The victim's co-workers were shocked by the news and eagerly shared their memories of her. "Naomi was a wonderful person," said the agency manager, a middle-aged woman named Patricia. "Clients adored her. She always found a personalized approach to everyone." "Did she tell you anything about her personal life?" "Not very much. Mentioned a guy named Caden, but she's been talking about him less and less lately. And a few weeks ago, she said their relationship was complicated." Roxanne took note of this information and continued questioning. A picture was slowly emerging. Naomi was indeed unhappy with her relationship with Caden, but her co-workers didn't know the details about the other man in her life. The next stop was the Seabreeze Bar. Roxanne wanted to talk to Terrence, whom Vivian described as Naomi's frequent visitor. The bar was just opening and she caught the bartender getting ready for the day. Terrence Clark, that was his name, was exactly as her neighbor had described him, a tall, athletic man of about 34. When Roxanne introduced herself and explained the reason for the visit, his face changed. "Naomi's dead?" He dropped the towel he was wiping the counter with. "How did this happen?" "Mr. Clark, I'd like to ask you a few questions. Did you know Naomi Jackson?" Terrence sat down on a bar stool, clearly shaken by the news. Yes, we've been seeing each other for a few months now. Tell me about that relationship. Naomi came here with some co-workers about 4 months ago. We got to talking and she started coming in regularly. At first, just as a client, but then we got closer. Terrence rubbed his face with his hands. She had a boyfriend, Caden. Naomi said their relationship had been dormant for a long time, but she was afraid to break up with him. Why was afraid? He was obsessive, calling her several times a day, controlling where she was and who she was with. Naomi said that when she tried to discuss problems in their relationship, he either got angry or ignored what she said. Roxanne took notes, feeling the pieces of the puzzle begin to fit together. When was the last time you saw Naomi? Saturday. We were walking along the waterfront. She was concerned, said Caden had gotten even more suspicious. I think he found out about our relationship. Did she ever mention that he was physically abusive to her? Terrence hesitated. Not directly, but she sometimes looked scared when she talked about him, and once I noticed a bruise on her wrist. When I asked where it came from, she said she'd fallen. After talking to Terrence, Roxanne returned to the station for Caden's second interrogation. He looked even more exhausted from the night in his cell, but still insisted on the accident version. Mr. Reed, I've talked to several people who knew Naomi. They told me that your relationship has been strained lately. All couples have problems, Caden replied. That doesn't mean I could have killed her. Did you know about Terrence Clark? Caden faltered. I suspected she had someone. That's why I wanted to talk to her. Suspected or knew for sure? Because witnesses say you were following her. Yeah, I've seen them together a couple times. By chance. Roxanne pulled out Naomi's phone, which had been seized as evidence forensics had already recovered the correspondence. Mr. Reed, in Naomi's phone we found messages from Terrence. The last one was sent on Saturday morning. In it he writes that he is concerned for her safety and advises her to be careful around you. Caden turned pale. I don't know what he meant by that. And we also checked your social media accounts. Quite a few posts about women, and quite aggressive ones at that, especially in the last few months. Those are just thoughts. People write all sorts of things on the internet. Mr. Reed, your phone records show that on Thursday and Friday night you were outside the Seabreeze bar at the exact time Naomi was there. You were following her. Caden was silent for several minutes, realizing that his version was falling apart. Finally, he spoke more softly. Yes, I was following her. I wanted to know the truth. And how did you feel when you saw her with another man? Anger, hurt. I loved her, and she betrayed me. Anger enough to hurt her? No, I didn't mean to kill her. We had an argument, and I grabbed her arms, but only to make her listen to me. We fell by accident. Roxanne studied his face. Mr. Reed, the medical examiner found bruising on Naomi's body that appeared days before her death, on her wrists and shoulders. Can you explain that? Caden closed his eyes. Saturday morning, I showed up at her house unannounced. We had a little argument. I may have squeezed her hands too hard when I tried to get her to tell the truth. So, you admit to having used physical force on her before? It wasn't violence, I just wanted her to stop lying. By the end of the day, Roxanne had a complete picture of what had happened. Caden Reed, driven by jealousy and rage at the deception, had killed Naomi Jackson in a fit of rage. His public declarations of hatred for women were just a way to vent his anger. But the true motive was a tale as old as time, jealousy of a rival. That evening, she executed a warrant for Caden Reed's arrest on a charge of second-degree murder. The case was dismissed.